So again, when we're working with percentages, we want to be able to convert them into fractions, decimals, and percentages. So if we have a fraction 2 over 3, we divide on our calculators and we can get 0.666 repeating. Okay, if you want to round that to 0.67, that's perfectly fine. Here we're going to end up with 66.666 repeating. I'm just going to round that to 66.67%. A decimal to percentage, we can just move that decimal over. Okay, it's going to be, this is out of 1, so we can make it out of 100 by making it 100 times bigger. Okay, or moving the decimal place over 2 times. As a fraction, we can write it as a fraction over 100. If there are common factors, we should simplify. So I'm going to take out the common factor of 5, divide by 5, divide by 5. Percentage to decimal is the opposite of this calculation, so we're going to move the decimal point over 2 spaces and make it 0.65. Okay? The decimal is a decimal percentage. Also, we could call this a unit rate. This is going to end up being, as a fraction, 65 over 100, and again, being a common factor of 5, we need to reduce that to 13 over 20. 5 over 4, when I divide that, I get 1.25. Again, that's my decimal percentage, or my unit rate. As a percentage, it's going to be over 100%, so it's 125%. Be careful these ones, okay? This is not 73% because we're only moving it over 2 places. Okay, so this is going to be a decimal. The percentage is a percent out of, this is a decimal percent, which is a comparison to 1. So we need to make 100 times bigger, so we only move the decimal point over 2 places. So we end up with 7.3%. The common mistake that I see is people like to convert that into 73%, which is incorrect. As a fraction, okay, this is going to be in the thousandths position. Okay, so we have to be careful. This number is in the thousandths position. So when we write this as a fraction, we need to use 1/1000ths. So 73 is not out of 100 anymore. It's out of 1,000. Okay, what you could do, and this is not good work with fractions, but we could do this as 7.3 out of 100, and then times 10 times 10 on top and bottom to get 73 over 1,000 that way. Okay, this is not good fraction work, but this is, the math is perfectly reasonable. Okay, the math is actually perfectly fine because we're using a proportion. We're only using times and divide, times 10, okay, times 10. Okay, so that would be perfectly fine. Now this doesn't reduce because 73 is a prime number. Okay, so in this case here, the last one, 310% as a decimal, we just move it over 2 places. So 3.1 as a decimal, and this is 310 out of 100. Okay, this simplifies by a factor of 10, and we end up with 31 over 10. Okay, so here are some percentage problems. Okay, make sure we can set this up as a ratio, but we're also going to start using a multiplier. Okay, so what percent, 765 is what percent of 450? Well, 450 represents, 450 represents my whole, so I need to put it down here. 765 represents my part. So I can work out my decimal multiplier here. We're going to start dealing with not very nice numbers, but because we're not dealing with fractions, it's okay to start using these decimals. So I'm going to get my multiplier as 1.7. Okay, there's my times by 1.7. So x is going to end up being 170%. So x equals 170%. Okay. 10% of 160 is what number? Okay. 10% of 160, well, basically I can just, this one's a fairly straightforward one. I'm going to start relying on this multiplying strategy. Now I have to be really careful that I'm multiplying when I'm supposed to multiply and I'm dividing when I'm supposed to divide. If we're unsure, we can set up a ratio. So I'm pretty sure this is correct, but I'm just going to make sure. So our comparison was 10% to 100%, and 160 represents the 100%. 160, yeah, this is going to be divide by 10 going up, or times by 0.1. That looks correct. Okay, so if we're ever unsure, we always go back to the simpler strategy. We are trying to use a little bit more of a multiplying strategy when we can, but we have to be careful. Okay, and if we're not sure, we can always go back to basics. So 33 is 30% of a number. Now 33 represents the part, 30% is the part. So I'm not really confident with this one, so I'm just going to make sure I put it into its ratio. I think I'm going to divide by 30%, but I'm not positive. So I have 33. My multiplier here is 0.3. Okay, there's my decimal percentage. Yeah, I'm going the opposite direction, so I'm going to divide by that 0.3. So dividing by 0.3, I'm going to end up with 110. Okay, so x equals 110. What percent is 150 of 150 is 96? Well, that's my part. 150 is a whole. If I just divide those two numbers, I'm going to get a decimal percentage. 96 divided by 150 equals 64, or 0.64. Okay, and I can write this as, so I'm taking a shortcut here. I'm just doing the count, getting the decimal rate, okay, and converting that to 64%. Okay, so again, we want to start developing some flexibility of how we can deal with this. If we're ever stuck, though, we always go back to a proportional equation. Okay, so I want you to work on these on your own, and then come back to the next video and I will post some solutions for these.